Welcome to this demonstration video. Today I'll be showing you a demonstration of the footfall dashboard. So this is the footfall dashboard, which is how practices receive and manage forms and requests that are sent in by patients and their proxies. We're logged in as the receptionist and we can see all of the forms that have come into the dashboard from patients. At the top of the dashboard, you can see there are 5 buttons which represent a different list of forms. You can select these buttons to change the list of forms you're looking at. Let's look at what each of these lists are. New holds new requests, which includes everything you are triaging and anything that may be assigned to you. Parked shows requests which have been placed on hold by someone in the practice. This is usually when we're waiting for something internal to happen, such as waiting for information from another member of the team before we respond to a patient. Waiting is where we're waiting for the patient to do something. This could be responding to a message we've sent, or as we see here, we have a new patient registering, but they need to come in to provide ID. All Open allows you to see all open requests that have come into the practice, whether they are in the new, parked or waiting work list. This includes requests that you have assigned to other members of staff. Unread by patient is when we have responded to a request and we've asked the system to tell us when the patient has read it. This allows us to follow up in cases where the patient hasn't read the reply. These lists help practices to organise, prioritise and keep on top of patient requests. Let's have a look at a patient request. When you open a form, you'll see the form exactly as the patient did, but with all of the patient's request information on it. In this example, we can see that Mr. Testing has had some difficulty with his breathing. He's asthmatic and is asking to see a doctor or nurse. As a receptionist, or anyone looking into this request, we have some options at the top of the form. Over here, we have some options to download, print or send the request to the clinical system. Here we have some options to help us deal with the patient request. We can reply to the patient via online message. We could close the request, which will take it out of a work list and close the request down. This is really only used once we've completed everything that needs to be done. If we selected Park, this would add the request to the Park work list. This is useful when we're waiting for information from a clinician before responding to the patient. We also have the option to put the form into the Wait work list if, for example, we were waiting for a response or information from the patient. If we felt a patient request was a priority, we can flag it by using Urgent, which will prioritise the request and move it to the top of a work list. This is visible to anyone in the practice. Adding a note will leave an internal note for any practice staff that may need to look at the request. And finally, we can assign the request to another member of the practice to action. We can use the drop-down to select who we want to send it to. As you can see, we have groups set up. Groups enables me to triage the request into a group to action, for example a group of doctors or nurses. Or we can assign it to a specific doctor. We can see that Daniel has put Dr. Richard Example as the best member of staff to deal with the problem, so let's assign it to Richard. Underneath, we can add a short note for the doctor and we can set an alert to tell us if the request hasn't been actioned within a certain time. This is an added layer of security which will flag the request to us if a doctor hasn't actioned it in a certain time frame. Looking at the dashboard now, Daniel's form has moved from the new list, but we can still see the request if we go to the All Open work list. And we can see the request has been assigned to Dr. Richard Example. Meanwhile, on Dr. Example's dashboard, we can see the request has come in. When we open the request in Dr. Example's dashboard, we can see the request exactly as the receptionist did. Let's say Dr. Example has decided he doesn't need to see the patient, and he has decided to reply to the patient through online message. We've written our response to the patient. The doctor also has the option to attach a form for the patient to complete. For example, this patient is asthmatic, so we could attach an asthma review form if we wanted to. In this case, having reviewed the patient's request and considering the ICE questions, we're going to ask the patient to increase the dose of their inhaler for a few days. We can ask them to contact us again in a few days' time if there is no improvement. We can then decide what we want the patient to do. We can select Allow the patient to reply to the response, which will give the patient the option to reply to the message. Underneath, we can set an alert. As mentioned before, the alert acts as a layer of security in cases where the patient doesn't read our response. This allows us to follow up if necessary. In this case, we've asked the patient to contact us in a few days if they feel their condition hasn't improved. So we'll select this and we'll add an alert of 5 days. Next, we can click on Send and Close to send our response to the patient. We've done everything we need to do on the request, so we can close it. If the patient responds to your message in a few days' time, it will come into the dashboard as a new request. In Dr. Example's dashboard, we can see the request has moved from New into Unread by Patient, so we know the patient hasn't read our reply yet. Now let's imagine we're the patient Daniel. We've had an email to tell us we've received a reply from the practice. We don't see the text of the reply in the email. Instead, we're asked to access a link to view the message. When we click on the link, it brings us back into Footfall on a secure encrypted connection where the patient is asked to enter their date of birth. This acts as an added layer of security for the patient. We can see the message exactly as Dr. Example has written it, and we're given an option to reply if we need to. Now, going back to the dashboard, we can see the request has moved from Unread by Patient, so we know the patient has read it. Let's take a look at another request as if we are a receptionist. In this request, we can see the patient, 2-year-old Charlie testing, has been suffering with a cold for a week or so, and there's a concern that it's gone to his chest and he may have a chest infection. Now, obviously Charlie won't have been able to send this request himself, so we can see on the left-hand side of the form the proxy information of his mother, Sophie. In a case like this, we can mark a request as urgent, so let's select Urgent from the options. This will move the request to the top of a work list. Let's assign the request to a group of GPs to triage. They will be able to see it as urgent and deal with the request as appropriate. Because it is urgent, let's add an alert to it. Let's have a look at another scenario. Maureen has requested a blood test. She's asked to book a routine appointment for next week. In this case, we would book Maureen an appointment on the clinical system and reply to her with the appointment time. We're going to allow the patient to reply in case she can't make the appointment, but this time we're going to send and close the request. This way, if we don't hear anything from the patient, we don't need to take any further action. Again, we can see the request has moved out of the dashboard altogether. It can still be found if required through search or all available requests. If the patient were to respond to our message, it would come through the dashboard as a new request. I hope you have found this demonstration useful and it has given you an insight on how practices use the Footfall dashboard to triage and deal with patient requests. Thank you for watching.